At 63 years old, I thought I understood my family. I thought I knew my son, but sometimes the people we love the most are hiding the darkest secrets. My son, Brandon, called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice sounded rehearsed, like he was reading from a script rather than speaking to his mother. Mom, Melissa, and I need to fly to Chicago for a conference. Her mother had another setback, and we can't leave her alone. Could you stay at the house for a few days? Helen had been lying motionless for 8 months, ever since she fell down the basement stairs at her old townhouse and struck her head. The doctor said the brain damage was severe. The poor woman just lay there in the hospital bed they'd set up in Brandon's guest room, surrounded by beeping monitors and feeding tubes. She never moved, never opened her eyes, never made a sound. Of course, sweetheart, I said, even though something about his request made my stomach twist. How long will you be gone? 3 days, maybe 4. He paused. The home nurse comes twice daily to check vitals and administer medications. You just need to be there in case anything goes wrong. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why they didn't simply hire round-the-clock care if Helen truly needed constant supervision. But I was so grateful that Brandon finally needed me for something that I pushed aside my doubts. On Thursday morning, I arrived at Brandon's, sprawling home on the other side of the city with my overnight bag. The house had always made me uneasy, despite its expensive furnishings and designer touches. Something about it felt hollow. Melissa greeted me at the door wearing her practiced smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. Eleanor, thank you so much for coming, she said in a voice that sounded rehearsed. Mom has been very quiet lately. The doctors say she's stable, but we simply can't leave her unattended. Brandon appeared behind her, already checking his watch. We need to leave in 2 hours to catch our flight. The nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez, comes at 8 in the morning and again at 5 in the evening. All the medications are organized in the kitchen with labels. I followed them down the hallway to the spare bedroom where Helen lay motionless in the hospital bed. Machines beeped softly, monitoring her heart rate and breathing. Her silver hair was neatly brushed, and someone had applied a touch of rose color to her lips. She looked peaceful, like she was simply sleeping deeply. She hasn't shown any signs of awareness in months, Melissa whispered as we stood beside the bed. Sometimes I talk to her, hoping she can hear me somewhere inside. But the doctors say she's probably not conscious of anything anymore. Something about the way Melissa said those words made me study her face more carefully. Her eyes held a coldness. When she looked at her own mother, that didn't match the worry in her voice. Brandon kissed my cheek quickly, a perfunctory gesture without warmth. We'll call tonight to check in. Emergency numbers are on the refrigerator. Then they were hurrying out, rolling their expensive luggage across the marble floor, and the heavy front door closed with a click that echoed through the empty house. Stood in the hallway, listening to the silence. The only sound was the steady beeping from Helen's room. I walked back to check on her, adjusting her blanket slightly. I reached out to touch her forehead gently, the moment my fingers made contact. With her skin, Helen's eyes flew open. I stumbled backwards so fast I nearly fell. My heart hammered against my ribs. Her blue eyes locked onto mine, alert, sharp, fully aware. Thank God you're here, she said in a raspy whisper, but unmistakably awake. I was beginning to think they'd never leave us alone. The blood drained from my face. Helen Dashie's single quotes, re. You're awake? She struggled to push herself up, wincing with effort. Please help me sit. I've been lying frozen like this for so long that every muscle in my body aches. My hands trembled as I propped pillows behind her back. My mind couldn't process what was happening, but the doctors said, Brandon and Melissa said you were in a coma. Helen let out a bitter laugh, the sound of someone deeply wounded. Oh, Eleanor. There's so much you don't know about what's really happening in this house. She gripped my hand with surprising strength. They need everyone to believe I'm in a coma. It's the only way their plan works. I don't understand, I whispered, sinking into the bedside chair. Helen's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice remained steady. They've been drugging me, Eleanor, every single day. Sometimes twice. Melissa injects me with sedatives that knock me unconscious for hours. She tells the doctors it's prescribed medication, but it's not. It's poison designed to keep me silent. The room seemed to tilt around me. That can't be true. Why would they do something like that? Because, Helen said quietly, they're stealing everything I own. They need me unconscious so I can't stop them or tell anyone. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my ears. Stealing your money? Helen closed her eyes briefly, as if summoning strength. My savings, my investments, my brownstone in Philadelphia. They've been forging my signature on documents, pretending I gave them power of attorney while I was supposedly unresponsive. She paused. They've already transferred over $400,000 from my retirement accounts. The number hit me like a physical blow. $400,000. Brandon would never ... I started, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was clinging to a fantasy. Your son, Helen said gently but firmly, is not the person you believe him to be. And Melissa ... Her voice hardened. Melissa is something far worse. I felt physically ill. How do you know all this if they keep you sedated? Because sometimes I can fight through the drugs just enough to hear them talking nearby. They think I'm completely gone, so they don't bother leaving the room when they discuss their plans. Helen squeezed my hand tighter. 2 weeks ago, I heard Melissa on the phone, laughing about how easy this has been. She told someone the hardest part was pretending to cry at the hospital. The walls seemed to close in around me. This can't be real. It gets worse, Helen whispered, and something in her tone made my blood run cold. They don't intend to keep this up forever. I heard them arguing about when to let me pass naturally. Those words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. They want to kill you, I breathed, and the words felt impossible coming out of my mouth. Helen nodded slowly. And Eleanor, I think you might be in danger too. The silence that followed felt deafening. I sat frozen in that chair, staring at this woman everyone thought was unconscious, trying to make sense of what felt like the worst nightmare of my life. What do you mean I might be in danger? Helen struggled to sit up straighter. You're here. As their alibi, Eleanor? The devoted grandmother caring for her son's poor, suffering mother-in-law. When something happens to me, you'll be the one testifying that I never showed any signs of awareness, that I simply slipped away. The implication crashed over me like a wave. They're using me. They're using both of us. But you can still survive this. I'm not so sure about myself. I stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, the world looked so ordinary. Children playing in a neighbor's yard. Someone walking a golden retriever. How could such darkness exist inside this normal-looking house? Tell me everything, I said, turning back to face her. From the beginning, Helen took a shaky breath. The fall was real. I actually was unconscious for about a week in the hospital. But when I started improving, when doctors talked about rehabilitation and eventual discharge, Melissa convinced them I was deteriorating instead. How? She reported that I was becoming confused and violent. She claimed I didn't recognize her, that I would scream and lash out when she tried to help me. Helen's voice dripped with disgust. She even showed up to a medical consultation with scratches on her arms. Scratches she put there herself. I felt sick imagining the performance. Melissa must have delivered. The doctors believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was the exhausted daughter sacrificing everything to care for her injured mother. She would weep during appointments, talking about how heartbreaking it was to witness my decline. Helen paused. She even brought Brandon to one meeting to corroborate her lies. What did Brandon say? Helen's expression darkened. He played his role flawlessly. He spoke about how difficult this was for Melissa, how concerned he was for her mental health. He suggested that perhaps sedatives could help manage my aggression, so his wife could continue providing care. The calculated nature of their deception was staggering. So the doctors prescribed sedatives, mild ones at first, but Melissa kept reporting that they weren't working, that I was becoming more violent and confused. With each visit, she painted a picture of a woman descending into madness. Helen closed her eyes. The doctors kept prescribing stronger medications. That's when Melissa started adding her own. Her own medications? She shows the doctors the legitimate prescriptions, follows their instructions in front of witnesses. But she supplements with drugs she obtains elsewhere. Helen's voice dropped. I believe she has connections from her previous employment. Previous employment? She worked at a senior care facility about 7 years ago. She was terminated under suspicious circumstances, something about medication discrepancies among patients. They couldn't prove anything, but Helen let the implication hang. The pieces were coming together to form a picture so dark I could barely look at it directly. She's done this before. I think so. And I believe that's how she and Brandon actually met. Not at a coffee shop like they claim, but through some connection to vulnerable elderly patients with assets worth stealing. I sat back down heavily, my legs unable to support me. How much have they taken? From what I've been able to overhear close to $500,000 from various accounts. My Philadelphia property is currently listed for sale, even though I never authorized it. They forged the paperwork using some legal loophole about guardianship for incapacitated family members. $500,000. I thought about Brandon's new car, the renovations to this house, Melissa's designer wardrobe. I'd assumed his career was thriving. Now I knew where the money really came from. The nurse who visits, I said suddenly. Mrs. Rodriguez, is she involved? Helen shook her head. She's legitimate and completely unaware. But Melissa is careful about timing. She administers the strongest sedatives about an hour before each nursing visit. Mrs. Rodriguez has only ever seen me deeply unconscious. She has no idea I can wake up. And the monitors? All the equipment? Real, but not connected to any hospital. Network. They simply track my vitals. As long as my heart beats and I breathe, everything appears normal to anyone who doesn't know the truth. A chill ran down my spine. You said they're planning to let you die naturally? What does that mean? Exactly. Helen was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I overheard them discussing it 3 weeks ago. Melissa has been researching how to gradually increase sedative doses to cause respiratory failure. She found information about how certain drug combinations can make death look like a natural complication of coma patients. The room seemed to spin. They're going to murder you and make it look like you simply gave up. Yes, the grieving family who tried everything but lost their beloved mother anyway. Helen wiped her eyes. Melissa has already started telling Mrs. Rodriguez that my breathing sounds more labored lately, that my color seems off. She's laying the groundwork. I jumped to my feet, unable to remain still. We have to contact the police. We have to stop this. With what evidence? Helen asked gently. It's my word against theirs. All the medical records support their narrative. The financial transfers were executed with forged signatures that apparently look authentic. And I'm supposedly a brain-damaged woman who can't think or speak coherently, but you're awake now. You can tell them everything. Can I? Or am I just a confused elderly woman with a traumatic brain injury, inventing paranoid delusions about her loving family? Helen's voice carried the weight of someone who had analyzed this situation from every angle. Melissa was very careful to establish a paper trail documenting my supposed cognitive decline. She had physicians note memory problems based on fabricated incidents she reported. How much time do we have? Based on what I've heard, they plan to begin the final phase when they return from this trip. They wanted me to have a few peaceful days with devoted family before my tragic, sudden decline. Helen met my eyes with a mixture of fear and determination. They needed a witness who could attest to my peaceful final days. That's your role in their plan. The understanding washed over me like ice water. They hadn't asked me to help because they valued me. They needed me as their alibi, the perfect alibi, too. Brandon's loving mother, who cared so deeply for her daughter-in-law's family that she sacrificed her own comfort to watch over an unconscious woman. Who better to confirm that they were devoted and heartbroken when Helen finally succumbed to her injuries? I thought I might be sick. All those phone calls from Brandon over the past few months, asking how I was doing, if I needed anything. I thought he was finally becoming closer to me, finally caring. He was keeping track of you, Helen said softly, making sure you were reliable and unsuspecting. The last shred of hope I'd been clutching shattered completely. Brandon didn't need me. He didn't love me. He was using me as an unwitting accomplice to murder. What do we do? I whispered. Helen gripped my hand again, her eyes burning with fierce determination I hadn't expected. We beat them at their own game. Over the next several hours, Helen revealed details that made my blood freeze. We spoke in whispers, even though we were alone, as if the walls themselves might betray us. The first time I knew something was truly wrong was about 5 months ago. Helen began. I was starting to feel like myself again after the accident. The physical therapy was helping, and my memories were becoming clearer. That's when Melissa started reporting episodes. What kind of episodes? She claimed I became violent when she tried to help me with basic tasks: eating, dressing, bathing. She said I didn't recognize her, that I would scream and strike at her. Helen's voice was thick with disgust. She even appeared at a doctor's appointment with scratches on her forearms, marks she inflicted on herself to frame me, and the doctors believed her. Why wouldn't they? She was the devoted daughter, exhausting herself to care for an injured mother. She would cry during consultations, describing how heartbreaking it was to watch me deteriorate. Helen paused. She brought Brandon to one appointment to support her testimony. What did Brandon say? He performed beautifully. He talked about the toll this was taking on Melissa, how worried he was about her well-being. He suggested that medication might help control my supposed aggression so Melissa could continue providing care at home. The systematic nature of their deception was almost admirable in its thoroughness. So the sedatives started, light ones initially, but Melissa kept insisting they weren't effective. She reported that I was worsening, more confused, more violent. Each consultation, she painted a portrait of a woman spiraling into dementia. Helen's voice hardened. Eventually, the doctors prescribed stronger medications. That's when Melissa began supplementing with her own supply. Where does she get them? She maintains legitimate prescriptions for appearances, but she also orders sedatives through questionable online sources using forged prescriptions. The shipping records are all hidden in this house. Deliveries to various addresses, PO boxes, neighbors' homes when they're traveling, even my old address in Philadelphia before I relocated here. How much has she spent on all this? Over $5,000 in the past several months. All paid for with money transferred from my accounts. The irony was sickening. They're using my own money to purchase the drugs that are killing me. Our Most disturbing discovery came when I found Melissa's notebook. She keeps a journal? Helen asked when I described what I'd located hidden behind cookbooks in the kitchen. Not exactly a journal, more like dot experimental notes. My stomach churned as I read. She's been documenting everything. The drug combinations, the timing, her observations about how you respond to different doses. Helen was quiet. Read some of it. I opened to a random page. September 15th. Increased morning dose to 7 milliliters. Subject remained unconscious for 22 hours. Breathing stable, but heart rate dropped to 52 BPM. Need to adjust timing to avoid suspicious. Readings during nurse visits. She's treating me like a laboratory subject. I turned to another entry. September 24th. Subject showed signs of awareness around hour 16. Made soft sounds when repositioned. Administered additional dose immediately. Note, may need to increase. Standard amount to prevent breakthrough consciousness. I continued flipping through pages, each entry more chilling than the last. October 8th. Discussed timeline with B. Agreed to initiate final phase after Chicago trip. Will document declining conditions beginning November 20th. Estimate 10 to 12 days for complete respiratory failure. Be excited about February cruise. Suggested upgrading to presidential suite with windfall. Helen closed her eyes. They're planning my death like a vacation itinerary. The final entry was the worst. November 12th. E will serve as ideal witness to final days. Her testimony about peaceful last weeks will be essential for any insurance. Investigations. B says his mother has always been easy to manipulate. She never suspect anything. Looking forward to finishing this chapter and beginning our new life. Can't wait to be free. I set the notebook down, my hands shaking with rage. She calls you the subject and me E, like we're not even human beings. Because to them, we're not people. We're obstacles to overcome and tools to utilize. Helen opened her eyes, and I was surprised to see determination instead of despair. Did you photograph every page? Every single one. Now we put everything back exactly where we found it. They cannot know we've discovered the truth. We spent Thursday carefully replacing all evidence in its original locations, ensuring everything was positioned precisely as we'd found it. Helen coached me on how to behave naturally when Brandon and Melissa returned. Remember, you've been caring for an unconscious woman for several days. You should appear tired, perhaps slightly overwhelmed. Ask lots of questions about my condition, what symptoms to monitor. Act like the concerned, slightly anxious mother-in-law who's out of her depth. Friday morning, Mrs. Rodriguez made her regular visit. As she checked Helen's vitals, she made an observation that sent ice through my veins. Has anyone been administering additional medications besides what's on the schedule? She asked, studying her charts closely. Her heart rate seemed slower. Then baseline. My mouth went dry. Only what's on the schedule, nothing else. Mrs. Rodriguez frowned slightly. Well, these things can fluctuate. I'll make a note for her physician to review. She looked at me with kind concern. How are you managing, dear? This can't be easy, watching someone in this condition day after day. I'm managing okay, I said, though inside I was screaming. She was observing the effects of Melissa's drugs without understanding what they signified. After she departed, Helen and I discussed what the nurse's observation might mean. They've been dosing you even while they're away, I realized with horror. There must be some kind of timed release mechanism. Check the IV bag carefully, Helen suggested. Melissa changes it daily before the nurse visits, but she may have added something before they left for Chicago. I examined the force setup meticulously and discovered what appeared to be a small auxiliary chamber attached to the main line nearly. Invisible unless you knew precisely what to look for. That's it, Helen confirmed when I described it. She's been administering extended doses through the IV system. That's why I've had difficulty maintaining consciousness for longer periods. Should I disconnect it? No. If Mrs. Rodriguez notices a sudden change in my vitals before Brandon and Melissa return, it might raise questions we're not prepared to answer. Leave everything as is. Time was running out to finalize our plan. Brandon had texted that morning, saying their flight was weather delayed, but they'd definitely be home by Saturday evening. That gave us less than 36 hours. What exactly are we going to do when they walk through that door? I asked. We're going to let them begin there. Final phase, exactly as they planned. Helen's voice was calm, controlled, but this time we'll be recording everything. Saturday afternoon, my phone buzzed. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. Hi, sweetheart, I answered, forcing my voice to sound normal. Change of plans, his voice came through. Our flight got moved up. We'll be home in about 2 hours. Instead of tonight, my heart lurched. We weren't completely ready. Oh, that's wonderful, I managed. I know you're both anxious to check on Helen. How has she been? The same as when you left. Mrs. Rodriguez says her vitals are stable. She seems very peaceful. The lies felt like acid on my tongue. Good to hear. Listen, Mom, I want to prepare you for something. The nurse mentioned that Helen's condition might start declining soon. It happens sometimes with brain injuries. Patients seem stable for months, then take a sudden turn. He was already laying groundwork, exactly as Helen had predicted. Oh no, what should I watch for? Changes in breathing, skin color, things like that. But don't worry too much. Melissa will know exactly what to do when we get back. She's experienced with these situations. I'm sure she is, I thought. After I hung up, I rushed to tell Helen about the accelerated timeline. 2 hours, she said, her voice steady despite the danger. That's enough time to finish setting up the recording equipment. Recording equipment? Helen smiled slightly. Did you think I've been lying here helplessly for months without making any preparations? She directed me to a box hidden in the garage behind stacked paint cans. When I opened it, I was stunned. Small digital recorders. A tiny concealed camera. What appeared to be professional surveillance equipment. Where did you get all this? I ordered it online months ago, when I first understood what they were planning. It took weeks of pretending to be unconscious while deliveries arrived, but I managed to hide everything before they could discover it. Helen's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. They think they're so clever. But I've been preparing to destroy them for months. We quickly positioned the hidden cameras and recording devices throughout the room. In just a couple of hours, Brandon and Melissa would walk through that front door, believing they were about to execute the perfect crime. Instead, they were walking directly into a trap. Are you ready for this? Helen asked as we heard a car pulling into the driveway. I looked at this remarkable woman who had endured months of abuse and manipulation, who was about to risk everything to bring her tormentors to justice. I'm ready. Let's end this. The front door opened. Melissa's voice called out cheerfully, We're home. The final phase had begun. Eleanor, we're back. Melissa's voice carried that same artificial sweetness that now made my skin crawl. I heard their footsteps in the hallway, suitcase wheels rolling across marble. Helen squeezed my hand once, then immediately went limp, her eyes closing as she transformed into her unconscious persona. The change was so complete, so utterly convincing, that for a moment I almost forgot she'd been speaking to me seconds ago. How is she? Brandon asked from the doorway, his face arranged in an expression of concern. But now I could see the cold calculation lurking beneath the surface. Very peaceful the whole time, I replied, standing from the bedside chair. Mrs. Rodriguez was here this morning. She mentioned the heart rate seemed slightly slower than usual. I watched Melissa's face carefully as I spoke. There was a quick flicker of something like satisfaction before she rearranged her features into worry. "Oh dear," she murmured, approaching Helen's bedside with theatrical concern. "Sometimes that can signal changes in overall condition." She placed her hand on Helen's forehead with false tenderness. "Poor mother. She's been fighting so hard." Brandon moved beside his wife. For a moment, they looked like a devoted couple, worried about their loved one. If I hadn't known the horrifying truth, I might have been moved by their apparent grief. "The nurse said we should monitor for any changes," I said carefully. "What exactly should I be watching for?" "Well," Melissa replied, still stroking Helen's hair with fake affection, "with brain injuries like mother's, patients can take sudden turns. Breathing might become labored. Color might change. It's all part of the natural progression. Natural progression." The phrase made me want to scream. "Is there anything we can do to help her stay comfortable?" Brandon and Melissa exchanged a look. That lasted a fraction too long. "We just keep her as comfortable as possible," Brandon said solemnly. "Make sure she's not in any distress. The medications help with that. I'll need to adjust her dosages based on how she's been responding." Melissa added smoothly. This was it. They were initiating the final phase. "Should I stay longer to help?" I asked. "I could take some time off work." "That's so thoughtful, Mom," Brandon said, and for a split second I almost believed the warmth in his voice. "But you've done so much already. You should go home and rest." "Actually," Melissa interrupted, "maybe Eleanor should stay tonight, just to ensure a smooth transition back to our normal routine." Brandon looked surprised. This wasn't their original script. "Vanessa, I think Mom has done enough. No, I really insist." Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. Families should be together during difficult times. Something in her tone triggered alarm bells. This wasn't about wanting my help. This was about maintaining control, about ensuring their witness remained present. "Of course I'll stay," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Whatever you need." Over the next several hours, I watched them settle back into their routine with mounting horror. Melissa reviewed Helen's medications, making detailed notes about dosages and timing. Brandon spent time on his laptop. I glimpsed travel websites and bank statements. During dinner takeout, eaten in tense silence, Brandon's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and smiled in a way that made my blood run cold. "Good news?" Melissa asked. "The cruise line confirmed our upgrade. Presidential suite with a private balcony." He looked at me and added casually, "We're taking an extended vacation after the holidays. We've been under so much stress with Helen's condition." "That sounds wonderful," I managed through clenched teeth. "You both deserve a break." The casual way they discussed celebrating Helen's murder as a luxury cruise made me physically ill. After dinner, Melissa announced she needed to check on Mother. She carried a medical bag upstairs. I forced myself to stay in the kitchen, washing dishes, playing my role. 20 minutes later, she returned. "She's resting comfortably." I adjusted her evening medication. "How does she seem to you?" I asked carefully. Melissa's expression was perfectly calibrated to convey a concerned sadness. "Honestly, I'm worried. Her breathing seems more shallow than before we left, and her color." She shook her head. "I've seen this before in patients. Sometimes they just start to fade." The groundwork was being laid. Helen's decline was officially beginning. That night, after Brandon and Melissa retired to their bedroom, I crept down the hallway to Helen's room. She lay motionless until I gently touched her hand. Then her eyes opened immediately. "What did she give you?" I whispered. "Higher dose than usual," Helen murmured. "I can feel it. Harder to stay awake. The cameras are recording. Every word they've said tonight is documented." Helen managed a weak smile. "Good, but we need more." We need them to actually confess, to say out loud what they're planning to do to me. How do we make that happen? Tomorrow morning, before the nurse arrives, Melissa will come to check on me. She usually talks to me when she thinks I'm unconscious, gloating about their plans, mocking me for being so helpless. Helen's eyes hardened. That's when we'll get everything we need, and then we contact someone who can help us. Someone who will believe us and has the power to act. I spent a sleepless night on the living room sofa, my mind racing through every possible scenario. At some point before dawn, I made a decision. I needed insurance. Quietly, I used my phone to upload every photograph I'd taken to a secure cloud account. Then I composed an email to my attorney, a woman I'd known for 20 years, someone I trusted completely. Joan, if anything happens to me in the next few days, please contact authorities and share the attached files. I've discovered something terrible about Brandon and Melissa. I know how this sounds, but please trust me. I attached every photograph, every page of Melissa's notebook, every forged document, every piece of evidence Helen and I had gathered. Then I scheduled the email to send in 72 hours unless I canceled. It thought if Brandon and Melissa suspected anything, if they turned on me too, at least the truth would still come out. Morning arrived gray and cold. I heard movement upstairs around 7. Melissa getting ready to care for her mother before the nurse's visit. I positioned myself in the hallway, close enough to hear, far enough to remain undetected. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Good morning, Mother. Melissa's voice drifted out, dripping with false sweetness. How are we feeling today? Silence, of course. Helen was playing her role. The nurse will be here in an hour. I need to make sure you single quotes comfortable for her visit. There was the sound of medical equipment being adjusted. You know, Mother, I've been thinking, Brandon and I have worked so hard for this. All these months of planning, all the careful preparation, and soon it will all be worth it. I held my breath. The doctors are already expecting you to decline. The nurse has noted the changes in your vitals. Everyone is prepared for the tragic, inevitable outcome. Melissa laughed softly. And when it's over, Brandon and I will finally be free. Free from this house, free from pretending to care about you, free to enjoy everything you've worked your whole life to earn. My hands were shaking as I pressed myself against the wall. The cruise is going to be magnificent, presidential suite. 6 weeks in the Mediterranean. We're celebrating with champagne and caviar while you're being lowered into the cheapest plot we could find. Her voice hardened. You never appreciated what you had, Mother. All that money, all those investments, and you lived like a pauper. Well, Brandon and I know how to enjoy the finer things. Your legacy will be providing us with the lifestyle we deserve. There was a pause, the sound of something being injected. This dose should keep you nice and quiet until Mrs. Rodriguez leaves. Tomorrow I increase it, the day after a little more. By next week, your breathing will be so shallow they'll need to call the doctor, and then ... double quotes, another soft laugh. Well, nature takes its course, doesn't it? I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly retreated to the living room, my heart pounding so hard I was certain she could hear it. Melissa appeared moments later, her expression transformed into the concerned daughter. Mother seems restless. This morning, I gave her something to help her relax before the nurse arrives. Is there anything I can do to help? Actually, yes. Could you run to the pharmacy? I realized we're running low on some of her medications. She handed me a list. I recognized it immediately. She wanted me out of the house when Mrs. Rodriguez arrived. Easier to control the narrative, of course. I'll go right now. Shy didn't go to the pharmacy. Instead, I drove directly to the police station. I need to speak with a detective immediately, I told the officer at the front desk. It's about a murder. A murder that hasn't happened yet. The officer looked skeptical, but something in my expression must have convinced her I wasn't simply a confused elderly woman. 30 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Marcus Webb, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Mrs. Harrison, start from the beginning. I told him everything. The drugs, the forged documents, the stolen money, the planned murder disguised as natural death. I showed him the photographs on my phone page after page of Melissa's notebook. The hidden drug supply, the falsified signatures. And you recorded them discussing their plans? Yes, hidden cameras in the patient's room. Everything from the past 12 hours should be captured. Detective Webb studied the photographs for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Get me someone from the Financial Crimes Unit and contact the county medical examiner. We're going to meet experts to verify these medications. He looked at me. Mrs. Harrison, if what you're telling me is true, your son and daughter-in-law are in serious trouble. I know, I said quietly. I also know that the woman they're trying to murder needs protection immediately. Every hour I'm sitting here, she's being drugged. Every hour brings her closer to death. Detective Webb nodded slowly. Then let's move quickly. 2 hours later, I returned to the house with 3 unmarked police vehicles following at a distance. Where have you been? Melissa demanded when I walked through the door. You've been gone for hours. The nurse already came and left. There was a problem at the pharmacy, I lied smoothly. They had to order one of the medications. I waited. Melissa's eyes narrowed slightly, but she seemed to accept the explanation. Fine, Mother is resting. I think today may have been particularly difficult for her. Her breathing seems quite labored. Oh no. Should we call her doctor? I've already notified him. He's going to stop by this afternoon to evaluate her condition. Melissa's expression was carefully composed grief. I want you to be prepared, Eleanor. The doctor may tell us that ... that we should start saying goodbye. I forced tears into my eyes, not difficult, considering the circumstances. Oh, Melissa, I'm so sorry. It's nature's way, she said softly. Sometimes we just have to accept that our loved ones are ready to move on. At that moment, Brandon emerged from his home office. Mom, you're back. Everything okay? She was delayed at the pharmacy, Melissa explained, before anyone could say. More, the doorbell rang. That must be the doctor, Melissa said, moving toward the door, but it wasn't the Dr. Dodd, it was Detective Webb, flanked by 4 uniformed officers. Melissa Chun, Brandon Harrison. You're both under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, forgery, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. The color drained from Melissa's face. Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish. What is this? He demanded. Mom, what did you do? I looked at my son, the baby I'd raised, the child I'd loved, the man I thought I knew, and felt nothing but cold emptiness. I did what you should have done, Brandon. I protected someone who couldn't protect herself. As the officers handcuffed them both, another team rushed to Helen's room. I followed, my heart pounding. She was conscious, tears streaming down her face as EMTs carefully disconnected her from Melissa's poison delivery system. You did it, she whispered when she saw me. You actually did it. I took her hand. We did it together. You were never alone in this, Helen, not for a single moment. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews, depositions, and court appearances.
The evidence we'd gathered proved overwhelming. Melissa's notebook alone was enough to establish premeditated intent. The financial records showed over $650,000 stolen through forged documents. The hidden recordings captured Melissa explicitly describing her murder plan. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, a former colleague from the senior care facility where Melissa had worked years earlier. Investigators had reopened old cases and discovered two other elderly patients who had died under suspicious circumstances during Melissa's employment. Deaths that had been attributed to natural causes but now looked very different. Brandon cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing detailed information about Melissa's methods and their complete financial scheme. His testimony helped ensure that his wife would spend the rest of her life in prison. I visited him once, in the county jail, before his sentencing. "Why, Brandon?" I asked through the glass partition. "I need to understand. How did you become this person?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "I don't know, Mom. I wish I could explain it. Melissa made it seem so reasonable. Just a little money here and there. Just keeping an old woman comfortable in her final years. It escalated before I understood what we'd become." "You understood," I said quietly. "You understood every step of the way. You just didn't care." I left without looking back. 6 months later, Helen invited me to her new apartment, a bright, airy space overlooking a city park. She was walking with a cane now, receiving physical therapy, slowly rebuilding the life that had been stolen from her. "I want to thank you again," she said as we sat on her balcony, watching children play below. "You saved my life, Eleanor. At tremendous personal cost." "You saved yourself," I replied. "You survived months of horror. You planned and prepared. You never gave up hope." I almost did many times, but then I would think about Melissa's cruelty, about all the lives she destroyed, and I would find the strength to keep fighting. Helen paused. "How are you coping? Losing your son like this?" It was a question I'd been asking myself constantly. "Brandon was lost to me long before any of this happened," I finally said. "I just couldn't see it. Maybe I didn't want to see it." I took a deep breath. Now I'm learning to accept that the son I loved was never entirely real. He was a story I told myself, a narrative that helped me make sense of a child I never truly understood. That sounds impossibly painful. It is, but it's also freeing somehow. I'm not responsible for who Brandon became. I loved him. I tried my best. And some people make terrible choices regardless of how they were raised. Helen reached over and took my hand. "You're a remarkable woman, Eleanor Harrison." "So are you, Helen. So are you." We sat together in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon sun paint golden light across the city. Behind us, a new chapter was beginning, one we never expected, built on the ashes of betrayal and loss, but also built on courage, on truth, on the unbreakable bond between two women who refused to become victims. Sometimes the family we're born into fails us completely, but sometimes, if we're very lucky, we find a different kind of family, forged not by blood, but by shared survival and mutual strength. As I looked at Helen, alive, recovering, free, I understood that some stories don't end the way villains plan. Sometimes the people they underestimate are exactly the ones who bring them down. And sometimes, even at 63 years old, you can discover strength you never knew you had.